putting a screwdriver through it again. So we thought we got it where we could record really easily, and then the camera froze. And then it wouldn't recognize the camera, and then the camera froze, and then it wouldn't recognize the camera. So I'm holding a screwdriver. If you put it right through the motherboard, that would cure all of my woes. I will take care of it through all the way. All right, we're going to be in Ephesians chapter 5 this morning. Last week we started the book of Ephesians. We were in Ephesians 1 and the first part of verse number 1. But because today is Mother's Day, I would like to be in Ephesians chapter 5 and just look at some truths that the Word of God has about the roles of the man and the woman. Now, I'm going to focus on the ladies portion here, and then in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whenever Father's Day is, I'll be in the same passage, speaking more harshly to the men. I always seem to speak harsher towards the men than I do to the ladies. Maybe because I know what side my bread is buttered on. You think I ought to speak harshly to the ladies, don't you? So we're in Ephesians chapter 5. I want to start in verse 22. I want to start in verse number 22. I am so glad, Allison, you came in. This message is for you from Cameron. Appreciate you paying attention. For you from Cameron. Cameron texted me and said, would you bring this verse up for Allison? And I'm going to make sure Allison is in the... He's so much in trouble, and he didn't even do a thing. I'm just getting him in trouble as much as I can. Cameron, you're welcome. Thanks, Pastor. That's what I heard. We'll start in verse 22. It says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as unto the Lord. And all the husbands said, that's right. Right? Now, you notice I started in verse 22 and I skipped over verse 21. All right, look in verse 21. It says, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of the Lord. And so, what is it that we're supposed to do? We're to submit one to another. Basically, that means we need to serve one another. But then in verse 22, he does say, wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. Now, wives, how many of you are smarter than your husband? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. All right, there is no doubt that probably in the majority of households, the wife is smarter than the husband. There's no doubt that in the majority of households, the wife is smarter than the husband. However, what does it say here? Submit yourselves to him. All right, and it's to your own husband. You shouldn't be submitting to somebody else's husband, right, or to some other man. Your first area of submission or in this area of service should be to your own husband. All right? Now, I asked who's smarter than, the wife is usually smarter than the husband, right? And Leica just threw her hand way up as tall as she could. But Alan was doing this. Put up your hand. She was being obedient to her husband. She was submitting to her husband, right, Leica? Just shake your head. Yes, that's what I was doing. He was doing this. Put your hand up. She threw it up as high as she could. But I asked the question, or I made the statement that normally the wife is smarter, and I agree, However, it says that you're to submit yourselves to your own husband, and then it gives a qualifier, as unto the Lord. How many of you feel like you're smarter than God? Yeah, me either. I don't think a one of you is smarter than God is. I may think that you're smarter than your husband, but I don't think one of you is smarter than God is. By the way, men, that goes for you too. And so what we need to do is realize that God's got an order for the home, and we see that laid out in Ephesians chapter 5. And like I said, today I'm going to focus on ladies, and then on Father's Day, I'm going to nail those men to the wall, because I am one, and I know how I am, and I need it. So the first thing is, wives, submit yourselves. We think that you're smarter. You think that you're smarter than the man. But why is it that we have such a hard time with that submit? Don't we have a hard time? And when I say we, ladies, I'm speaking to you. I'm doing you, the collective you, we. Why do you have a hard time submitting to your husband? Because you are smarter than he is. Why do you have a hard time? Well, let me show you. There is a biblical reason. Go all the way back to Genesis chapter number 3. All the way back to Genesis chapter number 3 and verse 16, and I will show you the beginning of the fall of the home. Genesis chapter 3 and verse number 16. If you remember, of course, in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, we have creation. Genesis chapter 3, we have the man and the woman in the garden. And there's one other person in the garden with the man and the woman. Who is it? It's the serpent. And we find out later on that's Lucifer, that's Satan, that's the devil. He's in the garden as well, and he's speaking with Eve, the woman, and they're having a conversation, and the woman is deceived. We find that later on in the scriptures. The woman is deceived. She grabs the fruit. She takes a bite of the fruit. Then she gives it to Adam, who's standing right there. And he willfully disobeys. He willfully grabs that fruit and eats it. And then the Lord proceeds to pronounce a curse on the serpent. And then he pronounces a curse on the man. But then in Genesis chapter 3 and verse number 16, he says, unto the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception, and in sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And that phrase there, thy desire shall be to thy husband, some have changed that and said, well, she's going to be more in love with him. That her physical emotions, her emotion is going to be, her desire is going to be toward him. Well, I'm sorry, but we just have perfect world here, don't we? We only have Adam and we only have Eve. And God created Eve for Adam and created Adam for Eve. And they had a perfect relationship. She couldn't love Adam anymore. And so the idea in this verse is not that her love is going to be more for her husband. The idea here is her desires to take his place. How do I know that? Well, the next phrase after that, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And that's like, you want the place, but he's going to rule over you. And we see that throughout, from that moment on, we see our homes being flipped around. Men, how many of you like to mess with your wife? Fight with her? How many of you like to do something stupid on purpose so that you can get yelled at? Now, ladies, it may seem like that's what they like because we do it often, don't we, guys? We just come in with the wrong look on our face and it's like, well, I just did something wrong because I can tell by her look on her face. I just saw this on Facebook the other day. It said it was a husband and wife that they just had their wedding ceremony. They're walking down the aisle, and the woman looks at the man. I didn't like the tone in your I do. He didn't even do anything. He just said, I do. And she's like, I don't like the tone. We're afraid. By the way, we're so afraid that we let you run the thing. That's not God's design. God's design is, verse 23, the husband is the head of the wife. And by the way, I'm going to put the head of the house. Even as Christ is the head of the church, for he is the Savior of the body. The husband ought to be the head of the house, not the wife and not the children. Boy, we have to say that today, don't we? The children should not run the house. Right? We're going to get into the children here in just a little bit. But the husband is to be the head of the wife. This is God's design for the house. Then in verse number 24, therefore as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Did you notice that that's the second time that the Lord, through Paul, the inspiration of the Holy Ghost, said that wives need to be subject or submit to their own husbands? Look in verse number 22 again, unto your own husbands. And in verse 24, so let the wives be to their own husbands. Some of you ladies work outside the home, don't you? And some of you have girlfriends. Some of you have co-workers that you will listen to more than you will to your own husband, and that'll get your home in trouble. And you need to be careful with that. You need to submit to your own husband. By the way, ladies, you chose him. You chose him. So you ought to not be bad-mouthing him at work so that your co-workers will bad-mouth him with you. That's the destruction of the home. That's a destruction of the home. And so, ladies, we need to make sure that we fall into our place as God has designed the home. By the way, man, I'm going to hit you real fast. Verse 25, husband, love your wives. Husbands, love your wives. You need to know your wife. You need to know what she likes. You need to know what she dislikes. Love your wives. And by the way, it tells you need to love her as much as you love yourself. Guys, how many of you love yourselves? Raise your hand. Like I see your elbow twitching. It didn't move, but I saw it do. How do I know that guys love themselves? We take care of ourselves, don't we? Don't we buy food that we like? Don't we sneak foods that we like? Don't we, here's the other thing I saw on Facebook. A little kid running in, and then he does a really quick U-turn. And the caption underneath it said, when my wife finds out I bought a new gun. He comes into the living room. She finds out. He does a quick scurry turn around and gets out. We sneak things, don't we? I have a friend in Virginia, and there were powdered donuts in the pantry. And his wife specifically said, Kenny, don't touch the powdered donuts. He was on a diet. He waited until Linda went to get into the shower. And then he snuck into the kitchen and got into the pantry, opened up the pantry door like this. By the way, the rest of the house is on the other side of the pantry door. So he opens it like this. Linda's over there at the back of the house getting ready to take a shower. He opens it, he grabs one of those powdered donuts and crams it into his mouth. And there's powdered sugar all over the place like this. And it was stale. It had sucked the moisture out of his mouth. And so you can't get rid of it unless you get some milk. And so he's got it here. There's powdered sugar everywhere. And on the other side of the pantry door, he hears, Kenny, what are you doing? The husband knew the wife knew her husband. Knew that he was waiting for her to get out of the room so that he could get into the pantry and shove that thing into his mouth. Hey, Kenny, what are you doing? He closes the door, powdered sugar everywhere, half the donut sticking out of his mouth. We love ourselves, don't we? To the point that we wait for them to leave the room so that we can do what we want to do. Right? So we ought to love them like we love ourselves. Verses 25 through 30 have to do with the man. So we'll pick up in verse number 31. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. It's interesting that that word man is the Greek word anthropos, which is the word for humankind. All right? It can be male or female. But it's modified at the end of that when it says, and shall be joined to his wife. And so, anthropos, or the human, needs to leave father and mother. By the way, that's both. Husbands and wives need to leave father and mother and be joined to their spouse. I was just going to say something, but I would get in real bad trouble if I said that. They two shall be one flesh. You know, it's not you and her. It's not you and him. It's you and this. All right? Or if we're in the South, y'all. My Hebrew instructor, his wife posted something, and was giving us a Southern lesson, and it was you and it was one person, y'all, and there was two people, but then there were several people in a group, and it said all y'all. Okay, all y'all. And so, two of you make y'all. All right, it's not him and her. It's not he and she. It's y'all. You become one. And so we need to leave mom and dad and be joined to our spouse, to our husband and our wife, because those two shall become one flesh. Verse 32, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Verse 33, nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. That's a rough word. Reverence. The Greek word behind that is phobos. Phobeo. Or phobos, I mentioned, is the noun form of it. Does it sound familiar to anybody? It's where we get our word phobia from. Every other time in the New Testament, this word is translated fear. Every other time. When we talk about the word reverence, as you and I would think of, see that she referenced, that word is a totally different word. I think, if I remember right, it's entrepo. That's the having the honor of, or honoring. That's that Greek word. But this word here, the Lord chose to use phobeo, or where we get our English word phobia. And so this isn't necessarily see that she honors him. The idea here is see that she doesn't honor him, but it's that idea of fear. By the way, it's translated in several other verses like fear the Lord, fear of the Lord. That same kind of fear that we have towards God. not necessarily afraid of. However, you ought to be afraid if you mess up. But it is certainly that idea of, and I don't know about your guys' case, but in my case, I was afraid of my dad. I feared my dad. I didn't want to mess up in my house, and let's say that he laid down a rule and then I went and broke the rule. Boy, that was dumb in my house. Do you know how I know it was dumb? My brother broke all the rules. He's dumb. My dad would say, make sure you're at home by 10 o'clock at night. 12:30, my brother rolls into the house. I found out that you don't roll into the house at 12:30 when my dad said be home by 10. You know how I found out? And I had a fear of breaking my dad's rules. It's the same idea, fear the Lord. That's the same word. As a matter of fact, in just about almost every other place in the New Testament that you find fear the Lord, it's this word. Now, wives, should you be afraid of your husband? No. Should you talk to him like you talked? Should you speak to him irreverently? And by the way, guys, I'm going to get you. Don't worry about it. All right? She's not the old lady. By the way, he's not the old man either. He's not that jerk. I can't believe God sent me that idiot. All right? That's not this word. Okay? We need to have a proper respect one for another. Ladies, would you like to be respected in the home? Yes or no? Yeah. Would you like to be respected in the home? All right. Would you like to be respected anywhere else? Would you like to be respected in the church? Yes? I'm hearing a lot of yeses. I'm just affirming that you're saying yes. You know how you do that? Can I share another verse with you, and I'll kind of use that as an illustration? If you want friends, show yourself friendly. If you want friends, show yourself friendly. If you want reverence or you want honor, how should you act? Respectfully, honorably. If you want it in the home, then act that way. If you're just going to be belittling, running around the house angry all the time, slamming stuff, things like that, you're not going to get that respect. Here's the word. It's phobeo. I told you that. Let me give you the definition. It says, be afraid, become frightened, absolutely be frightened, be alarmed, be afraid of someone, transitively fear someone, fear something. Definition, that was all definition number one. Definition number two, reverence, have respect for, fear, toward God, toward a person. That definition number two is the one that we need to be, is what wives need to be to their husbands, and really, husbands, you need to be that to your wives. We need to reverence, have respect for, fear toward a person. You want to have a good marriage. You want to have a good household. You want to have a household that's blessed of the Lord. Then ladies, there's a place for you in God's design. And like I said, I'm speaking primarily to the ladies today. I'm going to get the guys. Don't worry, I'm going to get them. Guys, you ought to be afraid. But then we go into Ephesians chapter 6 and verse number 1. I mentioned that the children don't run the house. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Doesn't it say, children, obey your parents? Parents. Parents? Isn't that plural? And then it goes on in verse number 2. Honor thy father and thy mother. By the way, the thy there is implied. Honor thy father and mother. I see a lot of times that children are obedient only to the point that they're about to get in trouble. You ought to be able to say to your child, stop, and they stop the first time. You ought to be able to do that. You ought to be able to say, stop running towards the parking lot, and they stop running to the parking lot. By the way, that's the reason for obedience, is protection. Stop now. And they stop, and then they can ask why. But not as they're walking out into danger, and you see who's coming towards them, and you want to protect them. You see what's coming towards them, and you want to protect them. You know what's going on in the world better than they know what's going on in the world, and you need to protect them and want to protect them, and they need to be obedient because of that fact. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, for this is right. By the way, look at what's in the parentheses there, which is the first commandment with promise. Here's the commandment and promise. The command is, children, obey your parents in the Lord. The promise is that it may be well, I'm in verse number 3, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live a long life on earth. Live long on earth. There's been some times when I've heard of a young person dying, and my first question is, what did they do to their mother? And a lot of times I'll find out that the child just disrespected mom just before going out and maybe got in a car accident. Disrespected mom and dad, have been disrespected mom and dad, and something happened. I remember we're missionaries in Mexico, and on our mission board there was the main secretary there. She would answer the phones, and then she would take care of the finances part, receive all the checks and everything. And man, we got to rely on her big time at the mission board. And one time we heard that her son had gotten in an accident and became a quadriplegic. He was riding around in a wheelchair, and he had to blow on a tube so that it could go forward. And I'm not sure how that whole thing worked. Suck on the tube for it to go backwards. I don't know how that works. But he ended up blowing on a tube to make that thing move. That's the only thing that he could do. And he said, I know that this was the judgment of God on me because of how I treated my mom. You know, it says here, children, obey your parents in the Lord, but parents, doesn't that mean that we need to be training our children? Moms, part of the design in this for the home is not for you to be buddy-buddy with the kids. It's for you to train them so that they can be viable, responsible citizens in the world. That's part of the job. I see, and you guys, how many of you guys have been in the grocery store and you heard that kid 5 aisles over? Right? And initially, I and I'm talking about years ago, I would get irritated at the kid. But you know whose fault that is? Our kid did it once. I'm not saying that we're the perfect parents. However, I didn't really tolerate that a whole lot as a dad. And we're in the commissary on one of the bases that we were stationed at, and John would want to pitch a fit in the commissary. He heard maybe some other kid doing it, so he's like, hey, if they're doing it, I'm going to do it. I leaned down real quiet like, and I got down on him like this, and I don't know if I was just poking his chest just a little bit or maybe grabbed his arm just a little bit to emphasize what I was about to say, but if you don't stop that, I'm going to kill you. Now, would I really kill my child? Absolutely not. Did he know that? Do you know what never happened again in the commissary? So Jeremy, my youngest, decided he was going to act up in another store. My wife just leaned down to him and said, if you don't stop that, I'm going to take you in the bathroom and spank you. I don't think he believed her. Because this kid got jerked out of the cart, marched into the bathroom. We didn't have issues with my kids running out into parking lots. We didn't have issues with them running out into the street, because when we said stop, they stopped. When we said jump, they jumped and then asked how high. You're supposed to smile at that. But it all comes down to this one. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother. And again, we're talking about the design of God for the house. And if you want a good house, you want a house blessed of God, and you want a home that is a refuge. You want a home that you can go into. By the way, can you go into your own house and sit down in your chair and in your recliner and just go, ah, and your wife is sitting next to you and she's going, ah, or your husband is sitting next to you and both of you are just like, ah. It's home. And the home is not a prickly place. You know what they say about the desert here? Everything in the desert is trying to kill you. That's what they tell you. Look at cactus. They've got little spines on them trying to kill you. Have you ever been around a jumping cholla? You get close to the jumping cholla and it shoots out barbs at you. Barbs. They go in and then they've got barbs, hooks on them, so that when you pull them out, you pull your skin like this, and then it finally comes out. Rattlesnakes, scorpions, brown recluses, black widows, tarantulas, javelina, coyotes. There's mountain lions out there. There's bears. Things in the desert trying to kill you. I bring that up to say this. When you go into your home, is it a prickly place where everything in it's trying to kill you? Or is it a place that you can go into and it's like, God's design is that. If we will assume our roles, and specifically this morning, ladies, if we will assume our roles in the household, and men, if you'll assume your roles, and you're going to find that out in a couple of weeks, there you can go into your home and it will just be, I know this is going to be a shocker, but I actually like my wife. I know it's a shocker. I like her. She likes me. You know, we'd rather hang out one with another, hang out together, the two of us, than hang out with anybody else. You know why? We like each other. No, she lets me win, which is why I like her. But we like each other. A perfect night for us would be getting some snacks, going into the garage, which we've made into like a little game room, and sit there and play our little computer games. Match 3 this, find that. Hanging out. Her and I. We like it. We're not in there trying to kill each other. She's not sitting there. And I'm not sitting there. God's design is that we assume our roles, we do our roles, and we can have this kind of life. It can be heaven on earth. It can be heaven on earth. Let's stand to our feet with our heads bowed and our eyes closed. I'm going to ask James to put on a hymn of invitation. I know, ladies, this was mostly centered around